Morning, good afternoon, good evening. I see we have Amanda, Josene, Judith. I'd like to do a quick check, see if you can hear me. If somebody could just type into chat, yes, we can hear you. That would be great. Well, chat is disabled. Okay, let me see if I can turn chat on. Can you see how to enable chat for people if I can? Just enable chat if somebody could try that. Amanda, I saw that you said that you could not use chat. Could you check and see? It's interesting. It said that chat was disabled, so you can't use it, but somehow I saw, well, I guess I saw it through Q&A. So saying disabled. Okay. Let's see. I've got the webinar chat enabled. Somebody care to try that? Okay, thanks, Amanda. I see that I did it. Okay. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and get started here. I see, trying to see how many participants we've got. We've got a dozen participants here this morning, or this afternoon or evening, depending on where you are. And I'm going to share slides here as well. Thank you for bearing with me while I got the chat enabled for people. Uh, I'm going to try to keep an eye on chat as we go through here as well. So our assessment or our session this morning is about how to get better value out of your development assessments. You can see on the screen here, we've got an image of ROI, and we want to maximize what's the value we're getting for the expense that we go to for using assessments, whether we're internal coaches, external coaches. We want to make sure we're providing the best possible value for the people we're trying to help. Briefly about who I am is I'm Dick Hannasch. I'm in Iowa in the central United States. So you can see that on the slide on the map shown there. I'm a certified coach. I spent 35 years in a Fortune 200 company called Principal Financial Group, which is headquartered in Des Moines, Iowa, Iowa's capital city. And in my time there, I was certified to use a lot of different assessments. And early on, when I got into using assessments, I was a bit frustrated by why are people not changing? Why are they not using things more effectively? Why are they not growing as much as we could? And over the years, I and colleagues figured out what are some things that we can do to maximize our use of assessments and get a better return on that. Well, by the way, in our group this morning, for all of the people who signed in, we had people from 14 different countries register. So welcome to everyone, wherever you are. I have a couple of questions for you, and you can just type in answers to chat along the way here. But I'm curious, what development assessments have you used or has your organization used if you're working in an organization already? Briefly type in something about what challenges have you experienced in trying to use those assessments, and then maybe something about what positive results you've seen. Certainly, I've had challenges with assessments in my own work, and I'll talk more about some of those challenges in a few moments here, but I expect that you probably had some challenges as well. See, Amanda, use Profiles XT, coaching work using Clifton StrengthsFinder and DISC. Profiles XT is not one that I'm familiar with, but StrengthsFinder and DISC I'm familiar with. Perhaps others are typing here too. The character, unfamiliar with that one. Facet 5, also unfamiliar with that one. What about challenges of experience? Is there anything you can type in there? Amanda is seeing positive results in workplace relationships as well as job fit. Positive results seem associated with a really robust facilitation coaching process. I would agree with that. I think that's what we saw at Principal Financial Group and what I'm trying to do in my work outside of that. I officially retired from Principal 2 years ago, took early retirement, but I continue running my own coaching business and use assessments pretty frequently with my clients. Pause just a moment longer and see if anybody else is going to type anything in on challenges or positive results you've seen. Challenges need expertise to read and interpret one by one. A positive result is people to accept its results positively. Challenges, skepticism, investment in longer term integration into work. Yeah, definitely things that we ran into as well at Principal Financial Group and outside of that. So others might be typing in yet, but I'm going to go ahead and move on here. Oops, my slides to move here. Okay. The objectives for our session here today, I'm going to talk briefly about some guidance on choosing an assessment that will suit your purpose and that's valid and reliable. I know some of the people attending here may not have done much with assessments in their work, but there are some things that you want to make sure that you're doing your homework on to make good choices. We'll talk briefly about challenges with how people respond to assessments. As somebody mentioned in the comments there, maybe people are skeptical about what they're seeing in the results, or they're having a hard time figuring out how to use them. And I'll talk about tactics that we used and that I've used to overcome those challenges along the way. And What we really want to do is try to ensure that the results get used and get turned into something that amounts to an action plan, a personal or professional development plan in some way, shape, or form. So I'll talk about that as well. Regarding choosing an assessment, on this slide, you can see there's a few key points in the slides coming up. I'll say a little bit more about each of these. By the way, if you haven't been in your email in the last half hour or so, I did email a copy of all the PowerPoint slides to everybody in a PDF format, so you can have those for reference later on if you wish. So you can just tune into what I'm talking through here along the way. By the way, as I go along too, if you have questions, things you want to ask via chat, you can go ahead and type those in and I'll try to answer those questions as we go here. So first thing is we really want to understand what's the goal or purpose that we're using the assessment for. Is it valid? Is it reliable? Is it measuring what it's supposed to measure? Is it going to do that repeatedly? And might we need to do some work with some other people to make sure that we're set up to use the assessments? And I'll say more about who I checked in with along the way. So our goal or purpose, I know everybody in here, almost everybody in here is a coach in some sort. So I'm guessing that you're probably using assessments for professional or personal development. Maybe some of you are working with teams. I know one person in the chat mentioned the use of assessments for selection. If you could type into chat, I'm curious, what is the number one thing that you use it for? Is it professional development? Or are you a life coach, maybe working with people more on an individual personal side of things? Are you focused on coaches? Or are you covering all of these things? Mindy says professional development. Thank you, Mindy. Professional and team for a cheer report. Sorry if I'm mispronouncing it. Karen, professional development, leadership competencies. The bulk of what I did at Principal Financial Group was working with leaders, but also a lot with individual contributors too. SF DISC for every new hire on the onboarding process. Wow. Okay. At Principal Financial Group, we used the Hogan assessment for anybody entering into a leadership position, whether you were an assistant manager coming into your first leadership role or whether you were somebody being hired into an executive level position near the top of the organization. Okay. Got a few answers in there. I'm going to go ahead and go on here for sake of time. Also, one thing to consider is where can you have the greatest impact? Amanda mentioned that they're using it for every new hire on the onboarding process. At Principal Financial Group, we were about 16,000, 17,000 people when I was there, and it would have been great. It would have been plenty of work for me and others if we would assess every employee who came in and create a plan for them. But we didn't have that budget to work with that. So we figured out we need to focus on the leadership role and try to maximize the impact there. And we had good results along the way. I'm going to talk briefly about validity. Validity, quite simply, is does the assessment that you're using measure what it's supposed to measure? And you may realize that just about anybody can create their own assessment and put it out there and market it under their own brand. But a lot of people who do that, or some people who do that, they don't have background or experience in how to design a good, valid assessment. And so it's a little bit, some of the assessments might be like if you went to a tailor and you paid them to make a new suit for you or a dress, some customized clothing. But if that tailor didn't take any type of measurements, and you went away and then you come back a couple of weeks later and they say, here's your garments, they may not fit well. So we want to be careful to try to choose an assessment that is actually measuring what we're aiming to measure along the way. If you're already using an assessment from any particular vendor, you can ask them for documentation about what's the validity, the reliability. Some instruments have a higher rating, higher reliability than others. And so if you've not looked into that, I suggest that you do take a look at it, ask about it when you're talking to vendors along the way. Reliability is really about, is this assessment going to be consistent? If I have the person take the assessment once, and if I had them take it again, would we see consistency in the results that the assessment produces? Some of the assessments are reliable, but not valid. You get the same sort of results every time, but it's not really aimed at measuring what we need to measure in some way. It could be valid, but not reliable. So it's on target in some way, but if somebody retests, they're going to get vastly different results. So some assessments, they might be more affected by somebody's mood, their temperament. Some assessments, people will retake it. It'll be pretty similar every time, maybe not identical, but close. And so what we're looking for is for assessments to be reliable and valid. In this session here, I'm not going to talk about which assessments are most valid, which ones are most reliable. Again, I would suggest that you go and talk to your vendors, check on their website to see what they share around technical documentation about their instruments that they've used. When choosing an assessment, it's helpful to check in or consider whether you need to check in with other departments, other parties along the way. In a corporate setting, I found that we needed to check in with not only other parts of HR, but also with our law department, our information technology people, even our data security people in some ways for things. Here in the United States, there are rules around not being able to use assessments if that assessment may have an adverse impact on protected classes of employees. Could be by race, could be by age, um, some of the physical abilities, those sorts of things. So we want to make sure that we're giving people a fair test that doesn't harm them in some way, shape, or form. There are also privacy rights, and it varies from country to country. When we were looking to use Hogan, I was responsible for helping us roll that out on a global scale. And we discovered that in some countries where we wanted to use the assessment, there were certain questions that were not permitted to be asked because those countries had deemed that that was too invasive, too personal to ask about. So we had to work with the vendor and identify, okay, what questions can we ask? Do we have a version of the assessment that is acceptable in that country along the way? Data security is a concern. Our IT and our information protection people wanted to know where is the data stored? Who has access? Is that vendor using appropriate measures to protect the data? Things that I, as an HR talent and development guy, had no idea what to ask about, how to go about it. But I think we had probably about 17 different countries we were doing assessments in or aiming to do assessments in. So we had to be very careful and very thorough in checking into that. We also want to make sure we were very clear on how assessment results were going to be shared internally, who was going to see results, who had access to the system where results were stored, how long would we retain those records, and then also even what languages are the assessments available in. We know not everyone is a native English speaker, and the assessments we were using were mostly developed by countries based in the USA. So we had to find out, can we cover the languages that we needed to cover? Spanish-based languages, languages in Asia, English, so quite a range of things along the way. So when we were choosing to implement assessments, it was a bit of legwork, a bit of effort to connect with everybody and get approvals for everything along the way. If you're an external consultant, you might not have those challenges, but the partners you're trying to work with, they might have some concerns or some issues to work through in that vein. Next, I want to talk a little bit about challenges for participants in the organization. The first thing that I want to talk about is something that I ran into after we were doing use of assessments for talent development for people who were in succession plans. We had designed a program that we called Links Leadership Insight Experience was the name of it. And we did a pilot with 8 people, and we weren't sure that the pilot was going to work and have the intended results. And we didn't want everybody being aware that we were doing it. And so the HR leadership decided we're going to take 8 people through, but we're not going to tell all 8 who the other participants are. So if you were selected, it was just you as far as you knew. And nobody was talking about it. And then we did that for a year and it went over well. People received it well. We got good results, good insights for people. But then we were gearing up to scale up and we were going to do 100 people the following year. And I decided we need to go and talk to the people who went through in year 1 and get some additional input from them about what worked well and what didn't work well. And the first person that I talked to told me that by chance, she had discovered somebody else who was in the program. She just happened to meet the person for lunch and she mentioned the program and he said, well, I'm in this too. So they had a great conversation and talked about the experience. But then she told me that when she found out that she was going through this program, the first thing that ran to her mind was that she was going to be examined thoroughly. And the metaphor she gave me was, I thought I was going to be cut open like a fish and examined. And this would be done on the executive boardroom talent table up in the company boardroom. She said, and I thought that if I wasn't found as being up to standards, I would be discarded like a fish that is spoiled. And we thought, oh my goodness, that is not the experience we want people to have. So a lot of times the people who are going through assessments might fear that they're going to be judged. They're going to be curious about that. So in a few moments, I'll talk about some of the things that we did to improve that and take away some of that fear for people along the way. Another concern that came up was people would be concerned, who's going to see my data? How's it going to be used? Is this going to be used for promotion decisions, advancement? Will I be ruled out if I don't score well on something? Is at the end of my career, what's going to happen with that? And so we wanted to make sure that we address those concerns in some way. We had some people who said that they thought that maybe the results were going to be sort of like a horoscope. Is it really going to tell me anything? Maybe the results are going to be so vague, so general that they're not really useful for me. And so we took care to try to ensure that these are going to be valid and useful in some way. Concern for the organization is, what are we going to get in terms of value for the cost? We don't have money to burn. We don't have huge budgets. So we want to make sure that we're careful with that along the way. And then what's that return we're going to get? How is this going to help people improve? Will it have hopefully a financial impact in the organization in some way? And I'll talk about some of the measures in one of my final slides, some of the measures that we looked at to try to evaluate what's the value we're getting from going through this assessment. Okay. I want to talk a little bit about some of the tactics, the challenges to overcome. So these are practices we used at Principal Financial Group. And then when I'm working with people outside of Principal, I'm trying to bring the chat back up here. Let me see if I can bring that up on here. Where is my chat? I lost my chat somehow. Let's see. That is not what I wanted to get to. I apologize for my trouble with the chat here. Let's see. That's not what I want either. Oh, shoot. Okay. Oh, now I see this chat up at the top here. Okay, see it now. Thank you, Mindy. Okay. So talking about the challenges along the way, let's see, get my slides to the right spot. Oh, goodness. Okay, back on track here. So one of the things we decided we would do, and I make a practice of this when I'm doing assessment work with individuals, is I want to make sure that we're involving the leaders of the people who are going to be assessed in some way, shape, or form. I mentioned the Links Leadership Insight Experience program that we did at Principal Financial Group. What we did there is we sent an email to the leaders of the people who are going to be assessed, outlining here's what the program is and here's what we're going to do with it. We also sent a similar email to the people who are going to be assessed and also to the HR business partners who were supporting them. We wanted the HR business partners and their leaders to be involved. The leaders are responsible for people's development and professional growth to some degree. So we felt we needed to have them looped in. We made sure that we took care to orient people to what was going to be done, why were we doing this, what was the Links program about, how results will be used and shared, and how it ties to development. In my work as an external coach with people, I encourage the leaders at the organization that I work with to inform the people who are going to take assessments why they're asking them to take it, what its intended purpose is to be. I do a lot of work where it's team focused, team oriented. So I want the teams to be aware of why we're doing this and how we're going to use it in the end. And people seem to feel a little bit more comfortable knowing that they're going through it together, feel more comfortable knowing it's not going to be used in negative ways for them. At Principal Financial Group, we used assessments. We told people it's always for professional development. We will never use the assessment results to make a personnel decision. We're not going to rule people out because we believe the assessments we were using, particularly the Hogan assessment, helps people gain insight into what's helping them, what may be getting in their way, and that people can learn and be coached to be more effective in their role. So we're using it for growth purposes, not for selection. When we would do a debrief with people, one of the challenges we would use or overcome would be overcoming their resistance, some of their skepticism, some of their fear. The first thing we would do is we'd try to send them the results in advance, if possible. When we went through our Hogan assessment training, Hogan advised us, don't send people the results in advance, to give them to them the day of. maybe have them look at it, but then invite them to come back later on and look at it. And we decided we would experiment and send the results to people several days in advance. And so typically we would send them about a week in advance and ask them to read through it. We'd give them a document that gave them a little bit of guidance, or an email with a little bit of guidance about, here's what are the major sections of the report. Here are some things to be looking for as you go through. Here's a way to be curious about what you're seeing. And that could possibly help you digest your results and be more prepared for a discussion with us along the way. And again, we encourage curiosity. We even put in specific points. Don't judge yourself by a single score. Don't judge yourself by a single trait. We want to look at the totality of things. Understand that we're going to talk about how do all these parts connect together. So we try to create that curiosity for people. Also, we tried to balance asking and telling without judging people. We discovered, or I've discovered along the way, that sometimes when people had their Hogan assessment done, or maybe DISC or MBTI, the approach that the consultant or the coach, whoever it is, that they have used is they've come in and they've told people, here's what your result says about where you're great, and here's where it says you're terrible, and here's what you need to change. And so it's been very directive and kind of corrective for people from time to time, rather than asking them, what do you see in the results? Did they seem valid? Did they seem accurate? Have you noticed times when these behaviors or these challenges arise for you? How have you handled them? So we make it more of a discussion, more similar to what we do in our coaching discussions for those of us in the call who are trained as coaches along the way. Also, we consult to interpret and reframe the results. If you've seen the Hogan assessment, you might know the Hogan assessment, you can get about 45 to 50 pages worth of reports. I know some 360s, you'll see some 360s, they might have, here's an abbreviated version, 8 to 10 pages. I've seen some that are north of 50 pages. So it can be a lot of data to wade through. And also the people that we're assessing have not been trained in these assessments. They're not familiar with them. And so we make sure that in our consultation, we help them interpret the results, and we ask them how they saw what they're seeing, and where necessary, we might help them reframe how they're interpreting something. I'll give one example from the Hogan. There's a trait that's called recognition. High recognition people like to be publicly praised, appreciated for what they do, what they contribute. Low recognition people, they'd rather be behind the scenes, be quietly thanked. They don't need a lot of attention along the way. And sometimes the high recognition people have said things like, well, it sounds like I want to hog the spotlight, like I need a lot of attention, a lot of celebration. And so we might take the edge off that a little bit and say, well, it's not that you need a lot of it. It's just you prefer it. And it doesn't mean that you have to be in the spotlight all the time. So we might have to soften it a little bit, but ask them, okay, do you get enough attention in the role that you do? What have you noticed about people around you? Do they want the same degree of attention? And just think about, how does this tendency affect their relationships in some way, shape, or form? Got a little exercise to ask you to do here. I'm not going to put you into breakout groups or anything, but to give you an example of the interpretation or reframing of things, I've got on the screen a couple of examples here. One is from the StrengthsFinder. If you're familiar with StrengthsFinder, StrengthsFinder identifies what are your top 5 strengths. What are things that you tend to do naturally, easily? It's a combination of the sort of the way you're wired and things that you've learned along the way from your experience, from your formal education. And then I've got one from Hogan Assessments. On the StrengthsFinder, there's a trait that is called woo, which they refer to as winning other people over. So people who have woo as a strength are people who enjoy the challenge of persuading other people to accept what they're offering, or to like them, to like their ideas. So it's a very, very much related to influencing other people and being likable. So you like to win other people over, persuade them. You're good at building rapport along the way. And some people, when they see that, it's like, wow, that's really a great thing. I'm likable, et cetera. But other people find the people who come on so strong in that way, maybe a bit off-putting, a bit over the top in some way. And so they might say it's too salesy, or maybe it comes across as overly outgoing, too perky. There's a number of things that sometimes people use to describe the winning others over personalities, or that strength. From the Hogan assessment, there's a trait that's called adjustment. And when you're high on adjustment, you handle stress and pressure really well. You're calm under pressure. You weather the storm. You're optimistic that things are going to turn out well, and you don't need much input or support from other people. You accept praise, and if people criticize what you do or offer you corrective feedback, it tends to slide off you. But what we encourage people to do when we're doing our assessments is if they caution them against reading too much into a term or phrase and or ignoring things in some way, shape, or form. So an exercise that we've sometimes asked people to do is, what would your best friend say about you if you had this trait to a high degree? Then we also ask them, what would your biggest critic say if you had this trait to a high degree or to a low degree? And what would a neutral party say about you? So when you look at either of these two traits here, I'm curious, what might you say, and what might your best friend say about you if you were high in one of these or in low in one of these? And you could just type something into the chat here. So as you're thinking about this, you might actually be somebody who is high in woo, or you might be somebody who's high in adjustment. Karen says she uses a similar set of questions and responses are also surprising for the client. Karen, if you care to share any of those questions, I think everybody in the call would appreciate seeing that. Mindy says, hi, Wu is a best friend. I would say people like you, you connect with people easily, you build trust. Best friend, make other people feel special because of your interest in them. Yeah. And then if you turn that around, what would your biggest critic say about you? You're fake. Nobody wants to be fake, right? You can be too much, need lower energy in a decision-making situation. Yeah. What's the most extreme criticism from your saboteurs? Okay, yeah. I know the term saboteurs from, was it uh, Sharzad Shamin's work on positivity? Yeah, what would a neutral observer say about that work? Yeah, so that little simple exercise can be helpful for people to kind of step out of their own judgmental tone about themselves from time to time, kind of step out of their shoes, step into somebody else's shoes and consider, okay, how else might I interpret this? And we found that this helps reduce defensiveness from people, helps them become more open to saying, okay, maybe there's something in here that I need to consider. What might I need to do differently? Uh, thank you for those of you who typed in comments here. I'm going to go ahead and advance on the slides here. Oops, let's go here. Another challenge that we would use is we would ask people during the debrief and even after the debrief to go back and reflect further about, in your assessment results, what are you seeing that may be helping you succeed? We want them to look for the positive. You've probably run into some people that they take a critical eye to everything, and maybe more particularly to themselves. Some people are pretty strong self-judges along the way. And so we want to interrupt that tendency with some people. Also, some people, those ones who are high in adjustment and Hogan, those are the people that are already optimistic they're on the right track. And so they think, hey, you know what, you're giving me feedback, but I'm fine. I don't really need to hear much from you. I'm fine going the way that I am. So we try to interrupt that a little bit by asking them what might be getting in your way. Is there something that maybe you're overusing in some situations that if you dial that down, did a little bit less of that, that might help you get a different result, a better result? If you had a lower tendency, a lower score in something, is that something where if you dial that up, you don't have to go from 0 to 100, but if you dial that up, did a little bit more of that in some situations, might that help you get a different result? I'll pull an example from the Hogan assessment as well. There's a trait called sociability. High sociability people are the ones, when you put them in a social setting with other people, they're very outgoing, very talkative. They break the ice, speak up first, speak up second, and sometimes they forget to listen. So they might need to identify, might there be times where I need to listen more, where that would be helpful? Low sociability people are the ones where they're in social settings where they don't know other people well. They're going to be more introverted. Their tendency will be to listen first, listen second, and then speak up. And they might need to learn, I need to dial up my sociability. I need to speak up a little bit sooner or maybe a little bit more frequently in meetings so that my voice gets in the room, people hear my point of view. And so I might need to recognize that and work on developing that. Also, sometimes we need to help people understand that adjusting their mindset could help them in some way. It could possibly help them succeed even more. Just yesterday, I was in discussion with an organization where we had one person who, under times of stress, pressure, and fatigue, she tends to get louder in her communication and dig in a little bit more. She's also high in adjustment, high in ambition. She's high in power. She likes to stand out. She likes to be not just a top student. She likes to be the top student and kind of get her way. And she has a colleague who, in times of high stress, high pressure, fatigue, actually gets quieter. She will give up on conversations. She's not as high in ambition. She's not as high in power as this other person. And so, in discussion with the vice president, the point that came up was that one who's very aggressive in her communication is a bit like a pit bull terrier. She believes she's right, and she's going to fight hard for what she believes. And that's the way that she has learned to operate. And the other person doesn't fight as hard. They're maybe like a dog who turns tail, runs away a little bit. And so she might need to learn some things to say, how can I hang in there? How can I stay in that conversation? How can I fight for my ideas? And the person who's more like the pit bull, they might have to learn to say, maybe there are times when it's okay for me to yield a little ground. Maybe we need to realize the competition is out there outside the organization, and helping other people have some wins or conceding some things might improve working relationships. We don't want to damage the business. We want the best ideas to win. But if the way you're communicating is getting in the way of getting ideas out in the open, um, that possibly it's going to be detrimental in some ways for the organization as well. So we might help people think about where might a change in your mindset. So that person is not the enemy, or a mindset change. I don't have to win every argument might be helpful. We also try to help people identify what will be the highest priority that you're taking away from your assessment. Sometimes people's results say there's a lot of stuff that they could work on, and we want their input on what do you think is the greatest need? What's most important for you? And having their leader present in the room is also very helpful. Sometimes the leaders see things that the people assessed do not see. And so we want to have that discussion. Where should I focus my time and attention? We also ask people what might be the spots where they could get the biggest return. Where might there be low hanging fruit that if you change some aspect of your behavior could help you get a better result sooner? I had one person that I coached. His tendency was to speak up first. He wanted ideas from his team along the way, but he found that his team would rarely offer up ideas. And so we talked about, how could you do this, and what's your usual approach? And this is a guy, he was about 6 foot 6 inches tall. So about what would it be, 2 meters tall for those using the metric system, and about 250 pounds with a big booming voice. So he's just kind of physically looming presence and very vocal. And so we coached him on changing his approach to ask other people to go first, get their ideas out there. And he found that that was an easy thing to get people to contribute their ideas early on in the conversation. So kind of an easy fix, easy solution. But sometimes we have to help people use their results to figure out where can I get significant results early. And when they get those results, then they're more likely to say, okay, what else can I do to use my assessment results to help myself move forward and be a better teammate, better colleague, better leader, or whatever my role might be. Also, we ask people to tie what they're getting to their vision of doing better work and having better working relationships. If you're a trained coach in here, you know that if we ask people these things, who do you want to become? What's your vision for yourself? What's your vision for your future? If we can tie our assessment results to that vision in some way, shape, or form, it tends to help people say, oh, this is good input for me. I can see where this fits in. I can see how this can help me become who I want to be as a leader. I can see how it could help me get to where I want to go. I could see how it would make my life easier if I'm collaborating, working with other people more effectively. So whether I got my feedback through DISC or Myers-Briggs type indicator or a 360 or Hogan StrengthsFinder, how does this tie to my vision of who I am, who I want to be? Gives people more of a reason to buy into those results along the way and say, I can use this for my development and growth. After the debrief, again, we encourage people to go back and do further reflection. With the Hogan assessment, there are so many pages that I asked them after the debrief to go back and reread and take notes on what matters to them. I created a Word document that I give them that says, what am I seeing that helps me succeed right now that I want to continue? What's the input that I maybe need to think about and figure out, do I need to use this in some way, shape, or form? Where might I use it? So I asked them to capture things and be able to bring back information for a further discussion, either with their leader or with me as their coach along the way. Try to tie it to development plans. I do some work as an independent coach. I do some work with organizations where they don't have development plans. They're not that sophisticated in their practices. So I will introduce a development plan to them, help them document that. And that starts with, what's your vision of who you want to be as a leader? What would actions be that tie to that? What would be indicators of progress along the way? What would be measures of success? Some organizations have that already, so sometimes I just get to hand that off to an internal training and development person, or the leader and the person assessed can do that together because their organization already has that. But that tying it to a development plan, something that's documented, is helpful to get better value out of the assessment. Also, I like to establish that there's an accountability partner. I mentioned the Leadership Insight Experience program earlier. What we did with that is we would have a closing discussion where it was the person who was assessed, plus their executive that they report up to, plus the HR business partner who is responsible for that part of the business. And we'd make them accountability partners, where the expectation was at the 3 month, 6 month, 1 year mark that they would come back and revisit the development plan and talk about progress along the way. If the development plan went out beyond a year, we'd encourage them to continue those discussions, touch base again, update the plan as needed, keep it evergreen to keep going. Again, for those of you who are coaches, you know it's very powerful in a coaching conversation to close out by asking the people that you're coaching, how are you going to hold yourself accountable? Who do you want on your accountability team to help ensure that you're taking these steps? How might I, as your coach, be an accountability partner? When people feel like they've got somebody who's going to hold them accountable for that, they're more likely to commit to doing the work, carrying out the assignments, and working on their progress along the way. After the debrief, again, we've asked them to document their actions in a development plan. We have them talk about their plans with their leader or others. Actually, there's sometimes when we've handed things off to an internal coach or an external coach, some people have mentors. Some people just say, hey, I have a best friend at work, a colleague who's really supportive of me that I really trust, and I'm happy to talk about my development plans with them. We're willing to work with whoever it is, or I'm willing to work with whoever it is that we might need to work with to have that accountability discussion. And again, try to have them meet over multiple times, multiple months, to discuss and sustain their progress. I want to talk just briefly about measuring outcomes tied to goals along the way here too. The Principal Financial Group, we did a lot of things, kind of going from level one, Kirkpatrick, did people like it? Did they find it helpful? On into more advanced things, trying to figure out what's the impact for the organization along the way. So we would survey the participant and the leaders to find out, did you think this was worth your time? And we'd ask both the leader and the participant. And if you see it here, a couple of comments that are typical of what we would see from people. People would say things like, I appreciate that the company's investing in me. Some people said, well, it was uncomfortable. I was nervous about this, but it made me uncomfortable in helpful ways. It got me thinking about, where am I now? Where do I want to go? How could I be better? Nobody wants to be told you're not good enough, but everybody wants to be told, hey, you're on the right path and you're on your way to getting better. So getting their immediate reactions was helpful for us. We also made a point to ask the participants for further insights. And so they'd say things like, I can see clearly that I have to grow in thought leadership. We had one person, he had spent his entire career as principal on the sales side of things, but the results of a multitude of assessments we used with him showed that this guy was really a strong leader. And you could probably pick him up and put him anywhere in the organization, and his leadership skills are going to shine through. He didn't have the technical knowledge of some of the other business units, but he said, I thought of myself as just a salesperson before. And then he said, now I realize I bring more to the table as a leader. And he said, that's opened my eyes to thinking about, I might want to move out of this business unit. And if I move out of this business unit, that exposure elsewhere could help me grow to maybe be in a more organization-wide leadership role, maybe become executive leadership talent at some point in the future. So great personal insight for him. We also ask people to identify where are you changing behavior in some way, shape, or form. And you see just a couple of examples here. Somebody said that they're trying to influence rather than argue their points. One person who tended to be more introverted, like to focus on the work, not on the people, said he was being more deliberate about networking, investing, and building relationships because he realized getting a lot of stuff done, I can't do it all myself. I have to have support and guidance from other people along the way. And we looked for that behavior change over the months and years after we went through the program or took people through the links program. We also got feedback from the HR business partners and the executives that they felt like that there were richer talent conversations and better outcomes. They felt like they were getting a more objective view of what are people bringing to the board. It's not, this is my favorite employee on my team. This is somebody who's got a reputation. It felt like we had more data that supported what was going on. For the Leadership Insight Experience program, we used the Hogan assessment. We also used 360 assessment. And we also used an assessment called the Ravens Progressive Matrices, which is a problem-solving, fluid thinking assessment. But people felt like they were getting something other than maybe somebody's most recent performance review that gave us insight into who they are, how they tended to operate. By having more data about more people across the organization felt like senior leaders had a better idea of who was in succession plans, who was ready, who was not ready. At Principal Financial Group, we had a term that we called Ready Now, where we would say, if this person left the organization, do we have one or several people who are ready now that we could move into that role and they could perform effectively? How many people would we have who would be considered ready soon? Ready soon would be, it might be 1 to 3 years before they're ready yet because they haven't had enough experience along the way. And then the third type was not ready, where we said it's probably more than 3 years out where they need more experience before they're ready to be in there. So we used our input from our assessment program, the Leadership Insight Assessment Program, to try to pencil in how many people do we have who are ready now, ready soon, or not ready for different roles. And that could also help us figure out how could we move talent around the organization? Where might we have a weakness in some way, shape, or form? At Principal Financial Group, we had an HR analytics team. And so we brought them in and used them to do some slicing and dicing of some of the data. We also did some work with Hogan Assessments and Korn Ferry to fine tune, for Korn Ferry to fine tune our 360 to make sure we were getting at what we really wanted to measure for leadership. So tying back to the validity and reliability. And so we had more data to take back to the C-suite. One of the people on our staff actually is a PhD in psychology. And the person leading the HR analytics team is also an industrial organizational psychologist. So we had a couple of great resources internally who could help us in that vein with analyzing what's going on. So I've been retired for 2 years, but that Leadership Insight Experience program is still going on at Principal Financial Group. And they've modified it a little bit since then, but people are still finding that it's providing good results, good data for them along the way. So I've been talking quite a while here, so I apologize for that. But I'm curious, what questions might you have that I could address in some way, shape, or form for you? If you want to type those into chat, I'm happy to answer what I can. See, Amanda asks, how do you manage privacy in the HR analytics work? A couple of ways we went about that is some of the data that we reported, we would use it in aggregate. So we would report saying, here's what we tend to see as strengths of our leadership people. For the Links program, we identified 300 people that we were going to take through the program. So we were able to use that. We were also able to use that to say, okay, if these are the tendency, is there an implication for what training and development we might need to do to accelerate talent growth? Might we need to adjust some things in leadership rotation programs? Um, we were a financial services company, so we have a lot of actuaries and accounts, and in the actuarial and accounting community, we would move people around the organization so they would understand the finances across the organization. And we came to realize we probably need to move more talent outside of the part of the organization that they grew up in. So we do some of that on an aggregate basis. Other things that we talked about, it was really who needs to know this sort of thing. So what stuff is information that would go up to the board? Who would see it? Actually, I mentioned the guy who had the PhD. He had access to some things that I did not have access to. I didn't have his qualifications, have his background. He worked closely with the CEO and did a lot of work with the board of directors around executive talent development. And so keeping it under wraps more for who really has a business reason to know stuff was more helpful in those ways. So, Amanda, I hope that that's a helpful answer for you there. Can I give some examples for possible actions for the person to take after the debrief, and what are the follow-up steps for the organization? For possible actions to take for the debrief, it could be they need to be more deliberate about building relationships in the organization. We had some people very introverted, very work focused, maybe had been a technical expert, and they needed to get out and be known better. Actually, I recall in one debrief, one leader said, well, think about this meeting we went to a few weeks ago where we had you present. And he said, how many of those leaders do you know, and how many of them know you? And he said, well, I think I know who all of those people are. And he said, yeah, but how many of them know your track record? How many of them know your background? How many of them have worked closely with you? He said, they haven't seen much of you. So there's going to be a little bit of healthy skepticism until you have a track record with them. So he said, we probably need to do some things to help you build your relationships. So we might need to be more deliberate about finding a project that increases your contact with that executive. We might need to do some things to have you have lunch or breakfast with that executive, facilitate some discussion so they get to know you more. Some people realized that they had challenges. I'm going to reference the Ravens assessment. The Ravens assessment, if people score high on that, they're very good at seeing things emerging from what seems to be unrelated data. And because they can see things more quickly and more readily than other people, the great thing is they might help us see advantages, business opportunities that other people aren't seeing. The challenge for people like that is because they can see things so clearly sometimes, they get frustrated when other people can't see that. And so what we sometimes need to help them do is help them figure out, how can I show people what I see? How can I communicate my ideas? How can I persuade people so that they don't become frustrated and say, oh, I can't believe these idiots don't see this. I can't believe they don't want to take action on this. So we had to figure out, how can we equip them to communicate more effectively and bring people along more. Also, for some of those people, it might be, oh, maybe we've got them kind of pigeonholed in this area of the company, and maybe we want to move them to something where we're having them doing more strategic analysis, more thought leadership for the organization to help us discuss where could we go, how might we get there, rather than narrow their view, maybe have them play a more of a larger strategic role in some way, shape, or form. Other people, it just might be they need to be more thorough, more reliable, more attentive to details, less hit and miss on the results, aim for more consistency, because when you're consistent as a leader, people love that predictability. For some people, it was more in the line of maybe emotional intelligence in some way, shape, or form. On the Hogan assessment, one element of what we look at is how do people communicate under stress, pressure, fatigue. Some people get quieter, they cut off communication. Other people, they become more verbally dominant, they fight more, they might intimidate other people. Other people check in more. And so we would help people discover, do you have a communication tendency that makes for difficult working relationships for you? If so, how can we help you unlearn some of those behaviors and learn more helpful behaviors instead. So that might be going to a class. It might just be enough to say, I'm aware of this and I need to stop myself, interrupt myself, and do something different along the way. Some people, they might have had a gap in strategic thinking, strategic planning. It had never been required of them in a role before. So it might be, we need to start to expose you to what's the company's strategic planning process, pair you up with a mentor, maybe send you to a training class on strategic thinking, strategic planning, things in that vein. So follow-up could be any number of different things for people. So Natalia, I hope that that's a helpful answer for you. Are there other questions you have? While I'm waiting to see if there are other questions, I'll add to in response to Natalia's question is one of the things we guarded against was to try not to have people chasing too many development activities at one time. So in our goal worksheet, we would ask them to identify 3 development goals at most. Every once in a while, somebody would want to squeeze in a 4th one, and we would allow that. But we had some people who came through our leadership and said experience program where they might have had just 2 goals to work on, or they'd have a primary goal where you said this is going to be the main focus for this year, and then maybe a secondary or tertiary goal that are less important. Okay, so Natalia said, what's the name of the assessment to identify if the person is good at strategic thinking and is able to see the big picture? Really, we used a couple of things in combination. The Hogan assessment. So if you go to hoganassessments.com, that is one. Hogan has a trait that is called inquisitive that they measure. People who score high in inquisitive love to think about strategy. They're the kind of out of the box thinkers a little bit more. They don't like to be bothered with execution of details. They need people who are low in inquisitive. The low inquisitive people are the ones who like to operate in execution mode. Let's get things done. Let's bring it to life. So that gives us some insight there. The other assessment we used is called RAVENS, RAVENS, progressive matrices. RAVENS progressive matrices. And briefly, what the RAVENS assessment is, it's a series of visual puzzles. So they will show you a set of drawings, and each drawing is a little bit different from the previous one. And I think they show you 8 or 9 drawings, and then there's a blank. And you have to identify what would be the next drawing that continues the pattern. And it will show you different options from which to choose. So it's not language-based at all. It's strictly a cognitive ability. And it's a timed assessment as well. I think you have to do, I think it's 40 problems in 20 or 25 minutes. I forget what the time limit is on it. People who really excel at identifying these emerging patterns from seemingly unrelated data, they find the RAVENS assessment fascinating and fun to do. The people who score low on it, they generally consider it, this was the worst assessment I've ever had to take. There was so much pressure. It was so hard. At Principal Financial Group, we bought the RAVENS. We could buy it through Hogan Assessments, and I think it was like $26 a person. There were some caveats with the RAVENS as well, too, though, because the result or the report that RAVENS kicks out to you will make you feel like maybe I'm the greatest genius on the planet, or it may make you feel like, oh my gosh, it's amazing that I even have a job. Because I score so low on this. Is there any hope for me? And so that was actually one of the things that we did with helping people with the assessment results. We decided we would create our own report that gave them a clearer idea of here's what this result means for you and here's what it doesn't mean. Or here's what it suggests might be your strengths. Here's what might be challenges. And we also built in, here are strategies that could help you. So if you're high in this, these are some things that are in your favor, but here are some strategies that could help you maybe be more effective, figure out how to bring people along. If you scored low on the trait, here's some strategies you can use so that this does not be a liability. You might just need to identify who are those people who could provide that input, who see those things. How do I tap those? How do I involve those people in some way so that I don't let my personal inability be a handicap to the team? There's ways to manage it. Um, so people really reacted most strongly to that. The 360s and the Hogan, they were fine with that, but the Ravens one tended to have a little bit more of a challenge for people. So we're down to about a minute and a half or so to go here. Are there any other questions that people want to ask? So I'm going to go ahead while we're waiting to see if there's any more questions. If you have questions later on, you want to pick my brain, ask how we did anything, I'm happy to share what I can. You can contact me by email. The email that I sent you this morning before the session with the attachment, it has my Calendly link. You can phone me as well, and you can find me on LinkedIn. Happy to share where I can, whatever I can with anybody along the way. And I hope you have a great rest of your International Coaching Week. Thanks, everyone.